Just before we dive into today's video, I do want to say that it's sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform that's going to make your online dreams come true. Squarespace is where creativity meets simplicity. Whether you're just starting your journey as an entrepreneur or whether you've already built a flourishing brand, Squarespace has got your back. With their easy-to-use tools, you can create a stunning website, engage with your audience, and even sell products, content, or your precious time, all on your own terms and in one place. So let's talk about some of the great features. First up, this Fluid Engine. It's like having a magic wand for website design. With Fluid Engine, you start with a top-notch template and then customize every little detail with their super cool drag and drop technology. Whether you're on desktop or mobile, it's all possible. Next up, extensions. Squarespace lets you connect your store with vetted third-party tools so you can supercharge your website's functionality. It's like having a team of tech wizards at your fingertips. Lots of magic references today. Now, let's not forget about email campaigns either. I mean, who doesn't love a good old email campaign, right? Easily collect subscribers, build connections, drive sales with personalized emails. It's like a secret weapon for customer engagement. So if you're ready to create your own stunning website, what are you waiting for? Head to squarespace.com/brainfood for a free trial, and when you're ready to make your dreams a reality, use the promo code BRAINFOOD to save a fantastic 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. All the juicy details are waiting for you in the video description below. Click that link and get started. And now today's video. In a fenced-off field near Langdon, North Dakota, stands a strange and enigmatic object, a 24-meter-high, truncated concrete pyramid looming over the prairie. Scattered around its base are other strange forms cast in concrete and steel, and a cluster of low, prefabricated buildings, now empty and slowly rusting away. These are the remains of the Stanley R. Michelson Safeguard Complex, a massive effort by the United States military to defend its nuclear arsenal from missile attack. The culmination of 20 years of cutting-edge research, the complex took 6 years and $6 billion, that's about $60 billion today, to build. Yet only one day after the system came online, the United States Congress pulled the plug on the entire project. Within 4 months, the sprawling high-tech complex was shuttered, decommissioned, and abandoned, becoming a crumbling monument to Cold War paranoia. This is the story of Project Safeguard, the missile defense system that never was. The roots of Safeguard go back to the development of the Nike Ajax and Nike Hercules missiles in the early 1950s. These weapons were designed to shoot down Soviet Tu-95 and M4 manned strategic bombers, which at the time were the only means of delivering nuclear weapons. But a new generation of nuclear weapons in the form of intermediate range and intercontinental ballistic missiles were just around the corner. Missile-launched warheads were far smaller and faster than bombers, plunging down on their targets from outer space at speeds of 6 kilometers per second. It thus became clear that a new type of defense system would be needed to counter this coming threat, an anti-ballistic missile system, or ABM. So, in 1955, the US Army commissioned a research group composed of Western Electric, Bell Labs, and Douglas Aircraft to develop an anti-ballistic missile system known as Nike Zeus. Nike Zeus consisted of 6 basic components. The first was the missile itself, developed from the older Nike Hercules, which could travel at 4 times the speed of sound and reach a maximum altitude of 280 kilometers, allowing it to intercept enemy re-entry vehicles above the atmosphere. Steering was via a set of movable fins while inside the atmosphere, while exhaust gases vented through the fins allowed for maneuvering in the vacuum of space. The missile was armed with a 400-kiloton W-50 enhanced radiation nuclear warhead, which destroyed the target through a combination of blast and radiation effects. But the most challenging aspect of Nike Zeus development was the radar system, which detected and tracked incoming warheads and guided the anti-ballistic missiles to interception. This system comprised 5 basic components: the acquisition radar, which detected incoming warheads at long ranges and alerted the rest of the system; the target track radar, which determined the warhead's position and trajectory with greater accuracy; the discrimination radar, which separated out the warheads from the remains of the rocket booster and other clutter; the missile track radar, which guided the Nike Zeus missiles to interception; and the data processing sensor, which tied the whole system together. These systems were marvels of 1950s electronics engineering, incorporating some of the first large-scale applications of the then new technologies of transistors and modular architecture. The target track radar was able to scan some 4 million cubic kilometers of space while keeping track of multiple different targets and intercepting missiles. In 1958, testing of the Nike Zeus system began at White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico and Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific Proving Grounds. While initially the missile suffered from a variety of issues, including excessive friction or heating of the guidance fins, these were eventually ironed out, and by 1963 the system had successfully performed 9 consecutive intercepts, both of Nike Hercules missiles launched from Kwajalein and Atlas ICBMs launched from the Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. Meanwhile, a prototype of the Target Track radar tracked the Echo 1 communications satellite at an altitude of 3,600 kilometers and successfully received a signal bounced off the moon. But just as the Nike system was poised to enter service, it was abruptly cancelled by the Department of Defense. There were many reasons for this decision. Firstly, the Nike use was developed under the assumption that Soviet ballistic missile deployment would remain relatively low. However, as the USSR continued to field ever greater numbers of increasingly advanced missiles, it became clear that an all-out attack would quickly overwhelm the Nike system. Worse still, advancements in nuclear warhead militarization allowed missiles to carry multiple inflatable radar reflector decoys, which would further clutter the radar image and overwhelm the system. Indeed, Army calculations predicted that at least 20 Nike missiles would be needed to ensure the destruction of a single enemy warhead. Finally, experiments like Operation Fishbowl in 1962 had revealed that nuclear explosions in the upper atmosphere created large radio blackout zones, meaning the first few missile intercepts would effectively blind the whole system. And for more on this phenomenon, please do check out our previous video on do EMP weapons actually exist, or are they only a thing in the movies? And now there was also considerable skepticism as to the practicality of ABM systems in general, with Herbert York, head of the Advanced Research Projects Administration, or ARPA, stating, "The problem here is the usual problem between defensive and offensive measures, countermeasures, countermeasures, etc., in which it has been my judgment, and still is, that the battle is so heavily weighted in favor of the offense that it is hopeless against a determined offense, and that incidentally applies to our position with regard to an anti-missile that they might build. I'm convinced that we can continue to have a missile system that can penetrate any Soviet defense." Nonetheless, the Department of Defense directed the Nike-Zeus team to develop an even more advanced anti-ballistic missile system, which became known as the Nike-X. The Nike-X system incorporated a number of advances over Nike-Zeus. Firstly, instead of traditional rotating antenna radars, the system incorporated the new technology of phased arrays, which allowed the radar beam to be steered electronically instead of mechanically, vastly increasing speed and accuracy. And instead of 4 radars, the system only used 2, a perimeter acquisition radar, or PAR, to detect incoming warheads at long ranges, and a missile sight radar, or MSR, to track the targets and guide the interceptor missiles. The system could track up to 40 objects simultaneously and detect objects as small as a baseball. Even more important to future technological developments, the data processing system for these radars made extensive use of another major advancement in electronics, the integrated circuit. Secondly, the Nike-X system used not 1, but 2 different interceptor missiles. The first of these was the Spartan, an upgraded version of the Nike-Zeus, designed for greater speed and altitude and armed with a 5-megaton W-71 warhead. This was designed to intercept warheads shortly after they were detected by the PAR while they were still above the atmosphere. However, thanks to the deployment of radar reflective decoys and other countermeasures, at least a few warheads were expected to get through this initial defense. Thankfully, these countermeasures would be quickly slowed down by atmospheric friction, causing the real warheads to become decluttered, that is, separating from their decoys and easier to detect. Unfortunately, due to their tremendous speed, the time between the warheads entering the atmosphere and reaching the ground was measured in seconds, creating a very narrow interception window. This secondary, low-altitude interception was performed by a second type of missile, the Martin Marietta Sprint. Measuring 8 meters long and weighing 3,500 kilograms, the cone-shaped Sprint was one of the most impressive weapons ever developed. Gas launch from an underground silo, the 2-stage missiles accelerated to a whopping 100 Gs, going from Mach 0 to Mach 10 in less than 5 seconds. So fast was the Sprint that within seconds of launch, atmospheric friction caused its casing to go white hot. The blistering performance allowed the missile to intercept incoming warheads at altitudes of up to 30 kilometers within 15 seconds. As with Nike-Zeus, the components of Nike-X were tested at White Sands and Kwajalein, where they performed practice intercepts on Polaris intermediate-range missiles launched from Navy ships and Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles launched from Vandenberg. Between 1963 and 1975, 150 test intercepts were conducted from Kwajalein with a 90% success rate, the last 21 intercepts being complete successes. As the system was expected to be able to survive a nuclear strike, all the major components, especially the above-ground radar antennas, had to be hardened against the effects of blast and radiation. Much of this research was carried out at Canadian Forces Base Suffield in Alberta, Canada, where in 1964, large piles of conventional explosives were used to simulate the blast wave from a nuclear weapon. Components were also exposed to underground nuclear detonations to test their radiation resistance. While Nike-X was being developed, world events were making the system's deployment increasingly urgent. On October 16, 1964, the People's Republic of China successfully detonated its first atomic bomb, while on June 17, 1967, it tested its first thermonuclear or hydrogen bomb. Suddenly, the bipolar nuclear contest between the United States and Soviet Union had become a tripolar one. In response to this new threat, on September 18, 1967, US Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara announced the creation of Project Sentinel, the system of 17 Nike-X sites scattered around the United States to defend the country against the small anticipated Chinese ICBM fleet or a limited strike by the Soviets. To ensure an adequate workforce for construction and easy access to utilities and other resources, the sites would be built just outside major metropolitan areas, with the whole system coordinated from NORAD headquarters in Shire Mountain, Colorado, via a system of hardened microwave tower links. Construction soon began on the first perimeter acquisition radar site at Sharpner's Pond, just outside of Boston. But almost immediately, the entire project became mired in controversy, receiving fierce opposition from multiple sectors. Predictably, residents of communities where Sentinel sites were planned feared that the installations would turn their homes into targets, and mass protests were held in several cities to oppose their construction. Meanwhile, government scientists continued to question the wisdom of ABS systems, not only because they might be ineffective, but because they might paradoxically increase the risk of nuclear war. This argument was based on the prevailing nuclear doctrine at the time, mutually assured destruction or MAD, which depended on the ability of both superpowers to annihilate the other to deter either from launching a first strike. An effective ABM system would dramatically shift this delicate balance of power, allowing one power to destroy the other while remaining impervious to counterattack. This, in turn, the scientists argued, might provoke the other power, in this case the Soviet Union, into launching a first strike before the ABM system became operational. Many politicians also opposed Sentinel on the basis of costs, including Pennsylvania Democratic Representative Daniel Flood, who argued that fallout shelters would be more effective than ABMs at saving American lives. To quote, "It is estimated that a shelter system at a cost of $2 billion would save 48.5 million lives. The cost per life saved would be about $40. An active ballistic missile defense system could cost about $18 billion and would save an estimated 27.8 million lives. The cost per life saved in this case would be about $700. I personally will never recommend an anti-ICBM program unless a fallout program does accompany it. I believe that even if we do not have an anti-ICBM program, we nonetheless should proceed with the fallout shelter program." The debate over Sentinel reached its peak in 1969 with the election of President Richard Nixon, who agreed to hold a thorough review of the system. This culminated in the Senate authorizing the construction of Sentinel on August 7, 1969, the resolution passing only by a single voice. However, the scope of the system was considerably narrowed, with the number of missile sites being reduced from 17 to 12, and the system's missions shifted from protecting the US population to defending the nation's offensive weapons installations. In this new guise, Sentinel was renamed Safeguard. Construction of the Sharpner's Pond PAR site was halted, and development efforts refocused on a pair of sites in North Dakota and Montana to defend the area's 1,000 Minuteman ICBM sites, a strategy known as counter-force defense. According to Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird, this strategy minimized many of the system's potential shortcomings. To quote, "When you are looking towards city defense, it needs to be a perfect or near-perfect system, because as I examined the possibility of even a thick defense of cities, I have found that even the most optimistic projections, considering the highest development of the art, would mean that we would still lose 30 to 40 million lives. But when you're talking about protecting your deterrent, it need not be perfect. It is necessary only to protect enough of the deterrent that the retaliatory second strike will be of such a magnitude that the enemy would think twice about launching a first strike." But just as construction was getting underway, world events once again intervened to change the fortunes of Safeguard. On May 26, 1972, President Nixon and Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev signed the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, or SALT, which reduced the number of nuclear weapon systems both nations were allowed to field. Under the terms of the treaty, the US and USSR could deploy 2 ABM systems each, with a total of 100 interceptor missiles to defend ballistic missile sites and strategic command headquarters. Consequently, construction was halted on the Montana Safeguard site, and the completed infrastructure was demolished. For budgetary reasons, it was also decided to abandon the site defending Washington, D.C. This left a single ABM site in North Dakota, which was named after Lieutenant General Stanley R. Mickelson, the first commander of Army Air Defense Command. The entire complex consisted of 6 separate sites spread out over an area of some 400 square miles. The perimeter acquisition radar, housed in a large concrete cube, was located outside the town of Cavalier, its single radar antenna facing north to detect missiles coming over the North Pole. The pyramid-like missile site radar, with a radar antenna in each of its 4 faces for 360-degree coverage, was located near the town of Langdon. This site also housed silos for 30 Spartan long-range missiles and 16 Sprint short-range missiles. Finally, scattered around the surrounding countryside were 4 remote Sprint launch or RSL sites with 16 Sprint missiles each. The site finally became operational October 1, 1975, just 3 days ahead of the projected deadline. At its peak, the facility employed 500 military and 1,200 civilian personnel, with the Army carrying
carrying out major improvements to housing, utilities, and other services in neighboring towns to accommodate the large influx of people. But this hyper-advanced shield against a counter-force strike was not to be, for only one day after the safeguard system became operational, the US House of Representatives voted to shut it down. The reasons given for the cancellation were familiar ones: advances in countermeasures technology and the use of multiple independent re-entry vehicles, or MIRVs, would overwhelm Safeguard. The system was too expensive, ABMs destabilized the global balance of power. Furthermore, the Chinese ballistic missile force the system was intended to defend against never materialized. The general consensus was that Safeguard was a system in search of a mission, while Texas Democratic Representative George Mahan stated, "We have spent $5.7 billion preparing to defend ourselves against the intercontinental ballistic missile. The Safeguard system has not been effective, except perhaps from a cosmetic standpoint. If we had done nothing, it would have been the same." Yet, contrary to popular myth, Safeguard did not shut down immediately. It remained active until November, while decommissioning officially began on February 10, 1976. The only part of the system to remain active was the PAR, which is operated by what is now Cavalier Space Force Station. Upgraded and redesignated the Enhanced Perimeter Acquisition Attack Characteristics System, or PARCS, it is used to track satellites and other objects in Earth orbit. The other system sites were stripped of their missiles and electronic equipment and sold to private owners. The MSR site is now owned by the Cavalier County Job Development Authority, which plans to renovate the property and develop an interpretive center, while the concrete pyramid itself was acquired in 2022 by BitZero Blockchain Inc., who plan to convert it into a data center. Finally, one of the 3 remote sprint launch sites, RSL number 3 near Cavalier, is open for private tours. The Safeguard system was the product of 20 years and $20 billion of research and development, 6 years and $6 billion of which was spent on constructing the Michelson complex itself. While the system's abrupt cancellation after only a day of operation may seem like a colossal waste of money and effort, the project was not without its benefits. Many of the advancements in radar and computer technology developed for Safeguard are still in use today, while the project was a major boost to the local economies and public infrastructure of North Dakota County surrounding the radar and missile sites. But most importantly, ABM projects like Safeguard served as key bargaining chips in Cold War diplomacy, convincing the Soviets to sign arms imitation treaties like SALT and START. These treaties have arguably done more to secure world peace in a nuclear world than defense systems like Safeguard ever could.